The air in Summit Hall hummed with a sterile, artificial tension, located in the most secure quadrant of the Triune Council Station. The Grand Chamber was designed to impress upon all who entered that they stood at the nexus of galactic governance. Vast holographic displays ringed the circular space, constantly shifting between star charts, treaty protocols, and the emblems of the three ruling species. The room's design, a perfect triangle of raised platforms surrounding a central speaking dais, left no doubt about the balance of power in this sector of space. Cale Harper straightened his formal diplomatic jacket, its midnight blue fabric embroidered with the modest insignia of Earth's diplomatic corps. As the human delegate to this extraordinary session, he felt the weight of responsibility pressing down upon him, like the artificial gravity that kept everyone's feet firmly on the polished obsidian floor. His specialty as a xenolinguist had earned him this assignment, but the urgent summons he'd received mentioned only anomalous data requiring human perspective. That vague description had given him 3 sleepless nights during the journey here. The crystalline Vril delegates entered first, their translucent bodies refracting the chamber's light into prismatic patterns across the walls. They moved with mathematical precision to their designated platform, each taking position according to a hierarchy invisible to human eyes, but governed by the complex lattice patterns of their silicon-based biology. Next came the Skreth, chitinous exoskeletons clicking against the floor in perfect rhythm. Their insectoid forms moved with military discipline, compound eyes constantly scanning for threats or weaknesses. Unlike the contemplative Vril, the Skreth's evolution as hive predators had made them aggressive expansionists until the Treaty of the Three had finally checked their imperial ambitions. Last to enter were the Nyoth, their slender, humanoid bodies cloaked in shimmering fabrics that seemed to bend light around them. The psionic species moved in eerie silence, their lidless eyes, completely black from corner to corner, revealing nothing of their thoughts. Not that they needed eyes to see. The Enoth's powerful telepathic abilities made visual organs almost redundant, kept only through evolutionary conservation. The 3 species had maintained an uneasy peace for millennia under the ancient treaty that had ended the Sundering Wars in the year 312 AG. Now, in 5112 AG, after galactic unification, that peace seemed more fragile than it had in generations. And Cale Harper, human, had been summoned into the middle of it. The extraordinary session of the Triune Council is now convened. Announced the automated system in the perfect universal translator voice that made every species hear their native language. Delegate Cale Harper of Earth is recognized and invited to address the Council regarding Matter Petition 97312 Alpha. Cale stepped forward, his heartbeat quickening. He had reviewed the briefing materials a dozen times, but they contained frustrating redactions and circular references. One term, however, appeared repeatedly in connection with security classifications: the Iridar question. Yet every database query he initiated about this term had been automatically terminated. Every historical reference containing it had been expunged from the records he could access. It was as if the word itself was forbidden. Honored representatives of the Triune Council, Cale began, his voice steady despite his anxiety. I am grateful for the opportunity to address this august body. Before I discuss the data anomalies, I would respectfully request clarification on a term that appears central to understanding the context of this session. Could the Council please explain what is meant by the Iridar question? The reaction was immediate and visceral. The Vril delegates' crystalline forms darkened to deep amber, a sign of extreme distress. The Skreth representatives rose to their full height, mandibles clicking rapidly in what Cale recognized as their alarm signal. Most unsettling were the Nyoth, whose collective gasp sent a psychic ripple through the room that made Kale's temples throb. The central podium, occupied by the Skreth envoy, Rook, erupted with the sound of a ceremonial gavel striking 3 times, each impact echoing through the chamber like a thunderclap. "Human Delegate Harper," Rook's voice rasped through translator harmonics. "You have violated Protocol 7 of the Sealed Concordat. That line of inquiry is expressly forbidden. Stop asking." At the edges of the chamber, security drones activated with a high-pitched whine, their weapon systems humming to life. The implicit threat was clear. Kale measured his response carefully, aware that his next words might determine not only his fate, but potentially the relations between humans and the 3 dominant species of the Galactic Alliance. "With all due respect, Envoy Rook," he said, keeping his tone even. "As Earth's representative, I have not been made privy to the Sealed Concordat or its protocols. If this inquiry is restricted, I apologize for the breach. However, I note that my clearance level should grant me access to all relevant treaty information pertaining to this session. The repeated appearance of this term in connection with the anomalous data suggests its relevance to my assignment here." The chamber fell silent as the 3 factions conferred internally. Kale noticed how the Inuth delegates seemed to communicate without speaking, their minds likely linked in telepathic conference. The Vril clustered together, their crystalline bodies touching at specific angles that Kale suspected formed some kind of communication circuit. The Skreth's antennae twitched rapidly as chemical signals passed between them. Finally, after several tense minutes, Scion Seal of the Inoth rose from her seat. Her voice, when it came through the translator, had the disconcerting quality of seeming to originate inside Kale's own mind rather than from across the chamber. "The Council will grant Human Delegate Harper limited forum time to present his findings on the data anomalies," she announced. "References to certain historical events will be permitted only insofar as they directly relate to the analysis of present inconsistencies. This dispensation is granted under the Exceptional Circumstances Clause." Article 17. Kale nodded his acknowledgement, recognizing the concession for what it was, a crack in an otherwise impenetrable wall of secrecy. He would need to tread carefully to widen that crack without triggering a complete shutdown. Thank you, Scion Sail," he responded. "In examining the treaty archives provided to the Earth delegation, I've identified temporal inconsistencies in several key provisions, specifically amendments dated to periods where, according to your own historical records, no council sessions were held." He activated his data pad, projecting a timeline onto the central display. "Note these revision timestamps on the non-intervention clauses. They coincide precisely with gaps in the official record, periods lasting between 17 and 38 standard days where no council activity is documented." The chamber remained silent as Kale continued, methodically laying out the discrepancies he had discovered. "What's more troubling," he continued, "is that when I cross-reference these anomalies with astronomical data from the same periods, I found evidence of unusual stellar activity in Sector 9, activity consistent with large-scale energy discharges or weapons fire. Yet no conflicts are recorded during these timeframes." Kale paused, allowing the implications to sink in. Then, carefully calibrating his approach, he addressed each faction directly. "To the honored Vril delegation, your historical archives from the Third Dynasty make reference to the Great Erasure coinciding with these timeline gaps. Could you clarify what was erased, and by whose authority?" The Vril representatives vibrated in distress, their crystalline forms emitting a high-pitched harmonic that the translators struggled to convert. Eventually, the senior crystal, Vocilla responded. The Great Erasure refers to a data purge authorized jointly by all three species following the incident. It was deemed necessary for stability. Kale nodded thoughtfully before turning to the Skreth delegation. Envoy Rook. Skreth military logs from this period reference a Containment Protocol Omega. The records suggest deployment of your entire 5th Battle Fleet to Sector 9, yet no enemy is identified. What exactly were you containing? Rook's compound eyes flashed with iridescent anger. Human, you test the limits of our patience. The Containment Protocol is classified under the highest security provisions of the treaty. And yet, Kale persisted, the treaty itself appears to have been modified during this period. Article 23, Paragraph 7, which now prohibits exploration beyond the Outer Rim, appears to have been inserted wholesale after the original ratification. By what authority was the founding document altered without full council approval? The Noth representative, Scion Seal, rose abruptly. Human Delegate Harper, your line of questioning suggests unauthorized access to sealed records. The Council demands to know your sources. Kale felt a subtle pressure against his mind, the touch of Noth telepathy attempting to breach his thoughts. His diplomatic training had included basic psionic defenses, and he employed them now, focusing on mathematical equations to create mental static. My sources are entirely legitimate, he replied calmly. I simply compared publicly available astronomical data with the official timeline. The inconsistencies speak for themselves. As for the treaty modifications, those are evident to anyone who examines the document's metadata with standard forensic tools. The pressure against his mind increased, and Kale felt beads of sweat forming on his forehead as he maintained his mental barriers. Suddenly, the pressure vanished as Vocilla of the Vril spoke. The Enoth will cease unauthorized psionic probing immediately. The crystalline entity vibrated. Such actions violate Section 2 of the very treaty we are discussing. Kale noticed a subtle shift in the chamber's dynamics. Fractures were appearing in the unified front the three species had initially presented. He decided to press his advantage. I propose a direct approach, he said. Rather than interrogating fragments of information, let us address the central question. What happened during those missing days? What was the Iridar crisis? And why has all record of it been systematically erased? The chamber erupted in chaos. The Vril senators surged forward, demanding Kale's immediate expulsion. The Skreth representatives chittered in aggressive patterns that the translators refused to convert, likely recognizing them as threat displays. The Noth fell into an eerie, collective silence that somehow felt more menacing than any verbal outburst. Amidst the tumult, Kale noticed one figure who remained apart from her faction's collective outrage. Lyra, a junior Vril archivist, had shifted to a pale blue coloration that Kale recognized as the crystalline equivalent of deep contemplation or concern. When their eyes met across the chamber, Lyra's outer facets dimmed slightly, a Vril gesture that could indicate either acknowledgement or warning. The session was abruptly adjourned by emergency protocol, with all delegates ordered to return to their quarters until further notice. Security drones escorted Kale from the chamber with barely concealed hostility in their programmed movements. Back in his assigned quarters, Kale reviewed his notes, searching for a pattern in the fragments of information he had gathered. The pieces refused to form a coherent picture, but he was certain of one thing. Whatever the Iridar crisis had been, its systematic erasure from historical records suggested something the three ruling species were desperate to conceal. A soft chime at his door interrupted his thoughts. When he opened it, he found himself facing the Vril archivist, Lyra. Her crystalline form now shifted to a neutral gray that would make her nearly invisible against the station's metallic corridors. Human Delegate Harper. She vibrated in a low frequency that wouldn't carry far. I believe we need to speak privately. Kale ushered her inside, activating the privacy field that was standard in diplomatic quarters. I appreciate your visit, Archivist Lyra. I sensed you might have insights you weren't sharing in the council chamber. Lyra's form pulsed once, the vril equivalent of a sardonic laugh. What you did today was either remarkably brave or catastrophically foolish. Perhaps both. I'm simply seeking truth. Kale replied, something that seems in short supply regarding this particular historical event. Truth. Lyra's crystalline structure vibrated with complex harmonics that suggested irony. An interesting concept. Did you know that the vril word for truth, Kalshavor, literally translates as that which resonates without disharmony? I didn't, Kale admitted, but it's a beautiful concept. Yes, Lyra agreed, her color shifting to a deeper blue. And by that definition, the official account of the Iridar crisis creates terrible disharmony. It has troubled me since I first accessed the sealed archives. Kale leaned forward. Then there are records that survive. Not officially, Lyra said, but archivists are, by nature, reluctant to destroy knowledge completely. There are echoes, fragments preserved in quantum storage, hidden within innocuous data streams, metadata that survived the purge. Can you access these fragments? Lyra's crystalline form darkened. Not without risk. The Forbidden Vault is protected by multiple security systems, including Enoth psychic barriers and Skreth kill drones. Even attempting to enter would be considered treason against the Triune Council. And yet, Kale observed, you're here, speaking with me about it, because what was done was wrong. Lyra replied, her harmonics resonating with emotion. The Vril believe that truth has its own frequency, a harmony that cannot be permanently silenced. What happened 5,000 years ago has distorted our shared history, created dissonance that grows stronger with each passing generation. Kale considered this. If we could access these records, bring them to light, it could destabilize the entire Galactic Alliance, Lyra warned. Or it could finally heal a wound that has festered for millennia. I cannot predict which. Sometimes the cure begins with pain, Kale said, quietly. Earth's history is filled with difficult truths that needed facing. Lyra pulsed in agreement. The Council reconvenes tomorrow. They expect you to be cowed by their show of force, to retreat from your inquiries. And if I don't? Then they will likely vote to expel the human delegation entirely, citing security protocols. Kale nodded slowly. Then we don't have much time. Can you help me access the Forbidden Vault? Lyra's crystalline structure briefly flashed with prismatic light, fear, uncertainty, or perhaps determination. Yes, she finally responded. But we must move tonight, while the Council is distracted with emergency sessions planning their response to your questions. As the station's lighting dimmed to simulate night cycle, Kale met Lyra at the agreed-upon junction of maintenance corridors. The Vril archivist had shifted her crystalline structure to absorb rather than refract light, making her nearly invisible in the low illumination. We must be quick. She vibrated at a frequency just above Kale's threshold of hearing. I've created a temporary loop in the security sensors for this sector, but it won't fool the system for long. They moved through increasingly restricted areas of the station, Lyra using her archival access codes to bypass security checkpoints. Kale noticed that the architecture changed as they descended deeper into the station's core, older, more austere, lacking the ornate embellishments of the public areas. These sections date back to the original construction, Lyra explained, sensing his observation. Before the treaty, when this was a neutral diplomatic outpost rather than the seat of the Triune Council. Finally, they reached a sealed doorway marked with symbols from all three species' languages, plus a fourth script Kale didn't recognize, angular and flowing simultaneously, complex in a way that suggested multiple dimensions of meaning. Iridar script, Lyra confirmed, seeing his focus on the unknown symbols, one of the few examples that survived the purge. She placed her crystalline form against a sensor panel, vibrating at a specific frequency that caused the ancient lock mechanisms to respond. The massive door slid open with a groan of long-disused machinery. Inside, the forbidden vault stretched before them, a vast repository of data storage systems spanning various technological eras. Some were recognizably modern, quantum crystal arrays and neural pattern matrices. Others were archaic, physical documentation preserved in stasis fields, mechanical recording devices from the early space age of each species. The complete historical record, Lyra explained, moving toward a central console, unaltered, unredacted, maintained in isolation from the main archives precisely to prevent the kind of anomalies you discovered. Why preserve it at all if they wanted it erased? Kale asked, examining the ancient systems with wonder. Because knowledge, once created, resists destruction, Lyra replied, and because even those who ordered the purge recognize that someday the truth might need to be recovered. They simply didn't expect that day to come so soon, or to be prompted by a species that wasn't even spacefaring when the crisis occurred. Lyra interfaced directly with the central console, her crystalline structure connecting to the ancient system. Data streams flowed visibly through her translucent body as she located and extracted the relevant historical records. "I've found the primary accounts," she announced, transferring them to modern format now. A holographic display materialized in the center of the vault, showing images and text from the time of the Iridar crisis. Kale watched in fascination as the true history unfolded before him. The Iridar, he learned, had been a fourth major species, not warriors or conquerors, but mediators. Their unique ability to perceive and translate between fundamentally different types of consciousness had made them invaluable during the chaotic early days of galactic contact. It was the Iridar who had negotiated the end of the Sundering Wars, who had created the translation protocols still used today, who had laid the philosophical foundations for peaceful coexistence between radically different forms of sentient life. And then, at the moment of their greatest achievement, the signing of the treaty that would unite the three warring species, they had simply disappeared, not died, not fled, but removed themselves from the galactic stage in a way that left barely a trace of their existence. "They sacrificed themselves," Kale whispered, understanding dawning as he read the classified reports. They used some kind of technology to extract themselves from the timeline, to make their very existence a fading memory. "Yes," Lyra confirmed, "but not completely. They left behind safeguards, conditions under which knowledge of their contribution would be restored. And the three species decided to ensure those conditions were never met." Kale continued, anger rising in him as he pieced together the conspiracy. They rewrote the treaty, erased the Iridar from history, and claimed sole credit for the peace. The Iridar's self-removal created a power vacuum, Lyra explained. What began as a temporary measure to prevent chaos became a permanent arrangement that benefited the leadership of all three species. The truth became first inconvenient, then forbidden, then almost forgotten. Kale's hands moved rapidly over the interface, compiling and cross-referencing the hidden records. "We need to broadcast this to all delegates, to all worlds." Lyra's crystalline form darkened with alarm. That would violate every security protocol in the Triune Compact. The Council has violated its own founding principles. Kale interrupted. According to these records, the original treaty explicitly required acknowledgement of the Iridar's role in maintaining balance. That provision wasn't just removed, it was inverted to prohibit any mention of them. He continued working on the console, establishing a connection to the station's communication systems. If we don't do this, the lie continues. And lies of this magnitude don't just obscure history, they distort the present and corrupt the future. Lyra hesitated, then moved to assist him. You're right. The disharmony has persisted too long. Her crystalline fingers interfaced with the system alongside his. I can route the transmission through the archival emergency protocols. They'll have no time to block it. Together, they compiled the most damning evidence. The original treaty text with the Iridar provisions intact, records of the deliberate historical purge, secret communications between the three species leaders plotting to maintain the deception across millennia, and, most importantly, the true account of the Iridar's benevolent role in uniting the early civilizations. Ready, Kale said finally. Station-wide broadcast in 3, 2. The vault door exploded inward. Security drones poured through the opening, weapons primed, followed by representatives from all three council species. Stop this transmission immediately, commanded Envoy Rook, his chitinous armor now augmented with ceremonial battle plates. What you are attempting is treason against galactic stability. Kale looked at Lyra, who gave the equivalent of a crystalline nod. He pressed the final command sequence just as the security drones reached the console. Too late, he told the envoy calmly. The truth is already broadcasting to every communication device on this station and to all diplomatic channels throughout Allied space. Scion Seal of the Nooth pushed forward, her usually impassive face contorted with fury. Do you realize what you've done? The panic this will cause? The trust that will be shattered? Trust? Kale laughed without humor. What trust exists in a society built on a fundamental lie? Your entire power structure is based on erasing the very species that made peace possible. The council members exchanged glances, silently calculating the extent of the damage and their options for containment. Kale noted how quickly their unified front had crumbled when faced with exposure. The station's communication logs confirm complete transmission, Lyra announced, her crystalline structure now glowing with a brilliant internal light that Kale had never seen before. The records have been distributed to all member worlds. There can be no second erasure. Envoy Rook chittered in rage, mandibles clicking rapidly. You will both be arrested and held for trial under Article 1 of the Security Protocols. Guards, seize them. Article 1, Kale said loudly, standing his ground as the drones advanced, is itself an illegal amendment to the original treaty, which guaranteed free access to historical records as a fundamental right of all sentient beings. He stepped forward, placing himself between Lyra and the security forces. Before you take any action that can't be undone, I have one final question for the Council, one that your own laws entitle me to ask. The sudden invocation of procedural rights caused just enough hesitation in the security forces for Kale to address the assembled council members directly. If truth threatens your power more than lies threaten your peace, he asked, his voice carrying clearly through the tense silence. What does that say about your unity? The question hung in the air, simple yet devastating in its implication. Kale watched as the representatives of the three most powerful species in known space struggled to formulate a response that wouldn't further indict them. It was Scion Seal who broke first, her telepathic disciplines failing to conceal a wave of shame that rippled visibly across her features. "The North has a saying," she said quietly. "A mind divided against itself cannot stand." We have been divided for 5 millennia, not from each other, but from our own history. The High Chancellor of the Vril, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward. His crystalline form resonated at a frequency that the translators interpreted as deep regret. "The debate is invalidated," he announced formally. "When the premises of an argument are proven false, no valid conclusion can be drawn. The restrictions on the Iridar records are hereby voided pending full disclosure and review." Rook of the Skreth chittered angrily, but found himself isolated as the other representatives signaled their agreement with the Chancellor's statement. The security drones powered down their weapon systems, awaiting new instructions. "What happens now?" Kale asked, still wary of the fragile truce that seemed to have formed. "Reconstruction," Lyra answered, moving to access the vault's main archival systems. "The restoration of lost knowledge. It will take time to reintegrate the Iridar's contribution into our understanding of history." "And accountability?" Kale pressed, looking directly at the council members. "For 5,000 years of deliberate suppression." The High Chancellor's crystalline form shifted to a color that indicated formal commitment. "A Truth Commission will be established, with representatives from all member species, including humans. No individual currently serving on the Council will be eligible to participate." Cyan Seal stepped forward. "The Noth proposed that human delegate Harper serve as the Commission's neutral arbiter, given his role in uncovering the deception." Rook, recognizing the political winds had shifted, added his faction's assent with reluctant clicks of his mandibles. "The Skreth will comply, provided all species face equal scrutiny for their roles in the historical purge." In the days that followed, Kale and Lyra worked tirelessly to organize the vast repository of hidden knowledge for public dissemination. The station buzzed with a new energy as delegates from all member worlds converged to witness this unprecedented revelation. The initial shock and outrage gradually gave way to profound collective reflection. The 3 founding species were forced to confront uncomfortable truths about their shared history and the foundations of their alliance. Many older leaders resigned their positions, unable to justify their complicity in maintaining the deception. 1 month after the revelation in the Forbidden Vault, the newly formed Interspecies Assembly gathered in Summit Hall. Representatives from all member worlds, including previously marginalized species whose historical contributions had also been minimized, came together to draft what would become known as the Covenant of Open Inquiry. Kale, standing before the assembled delegates, felt a profound sense of accomplishment mixed with humility. What had begun as a linguistic anomaly had led to a fundamental restructuring of galactic governance. The Iridar understood something that we are only now beginning to grasp. He told the assembly, "True unity doesn't come from enforced harmony or the suppression of difficult truths. It emerges from honest acknowledgement of our differences and our failings, coupled with the shared commitment to do better." He gestured to the newly installed memorial at the center of the hall, a holographic representation of Iridar script that continuously translated itself into the languages of all member species. Their final message to us, preserved in these archives, was not one of accusation, but of hope. They withdrew not out of despair, but out of faith that we would eventually find our way to authentic cooperation without their guidance. Lyra, now serving as chief archivist for the new assembly, joined him at the podium. Her crystalline form shimmered with colors that represented the full spectrum of Vril emotional expression: pride, hope, determination, and a touch of lingering sadness for the time lost to deception. The Iridar left conditions for their possible return. she announced to a murmur of surprise from the assembly. When genuine understanding replaces enforced consensus, when knowledge flows freely between all sentient beings, when power serves truth rather than controlling it, then they may rejoin our community of worlds. As Kale looked out over the assembled delegates, Vril, Skreth, N'Oth, humans, and a dozen other species now given equal voice in determining their shared future, he felt the weight of his final question still resonating through the chamber. It had not been meant as a weapon, but as an invitation to examine the nature of true unity and the courage required to achieve it. The debate had indeed ended permanently, but something far more valuable had taken its place. Genuine dialogue, with all its messiness, discomfort, and transformative potential. And it had begun, as true change often does, with a question that someone had been brave enough, or perhaps foolish enough, to ask. In the vast archives now open to all species, Kale had found a fragment of Iridar philosophy that seemed to capture the essence of what had transpired. The most dangerous question is the one that reveals the difference between what we claim to value and what our actions defend. In that moment of recognition lies the seed of either growth or deeper deception. The Triune Council Station, once a monument to carefully managed power, had become something else entirely, a forum for authentic exchange between fundamentally different forms of consciousness, each bringing their unique perspective to the shared project of galactic civilization. And somewhere, perhaps in dimensions beyond conventional perception, the Iridar were watching, waiting to see whether the unity their intervention had once made possible might finally evolve from enforced stability into genuine understanding. Kale had no illusions about the challenges ahead. 5 millennia of historical distortion would not be undone in a day or a year or perhaps even a generation. But as he stood beside Lyra, watching representatives of once hostile species engaged in passionate but respectful debate, he allowed himself to hope that they had taken the first crucial step toward the future the Iridar had envisioned, one where truth and power no longer stood in opposition, but served as complementary forces in the evolution of a truly united galaxy. The question had been asked. The answer would unfold across stars and centuries. And that, Kale thought, was exactly as it should be.